of Rooted in Reverence, a podcast associated with my business, Mystic Botanica. Today, I am so honored to be sitting here talking to the amazing, the legendary Rosemary Gladstar. How are you?
Well, I'm glad. Thank you for inviting me, and it's an honor to be your first podcast in your series. That's great.
It's exciting, so exciting for me. I know all of the little herby gals that I go to school with are so looking forward to watching. So thank you so much for being here. So Rooted in Reverence started as a passion project, really, for the herbal community. There is a bit of a disconnect between, I believe, the newer generation of herbalists and our revered population of herbalists. Those of you who have been around and know everything, our teachers, our elders. And I just love to have the opportunity to really dig deep and ask you the series of questions that I formulated. I'm going to go through and ask all 10 of these questions to every single interviewee on the podcast. And I am so excited to see how different everybody's perspective is. I did send you the questions beforehand, so I hope you don't feel like you're being taken by surprise. But without any further ado, let's go into the first one. So, what drew you to the path of herbalism? And was there a defining moment when you knew this would be your life's work?
I think I was called by the plants when I was a really young child, and I've heard that story actually from so many of my students and fellow herbalists. That we sort of had a calling and we knew it, and so many people are called away from their calling, right? They're the lure of a really good job, or that the teachings that we have to be responsible and get good jobs. But I was just sort of allowed to run free with my dream. I think in part, I grew up on a farm and we were just sort of allowed to run wild, and that wildness really informed and inspired us. I also grew up in just a plant-rich community, Sonoma County, Northern California, where there was such an enormous variety of plants around me all the time, just talking to me. When we're children, when we're in nature, we automatically hear and connect with nature. You don't need any formal kind of teaching about it. We are nature, and so our receptors are always out. So I was just taking all those teachings in as a child. Of course, I never termed it I was going to be an herbalist, but I was a plant lover from the time I was born. Even with the name, I always feel very gifted. I was given the name Rosemary at birth, but I wasn't named after the plant. I was named after my grandmother's. And I want to just, hail my grandmother here too. She also had a really enormous impact on me as a child. And without really meaning to. It wasn't like she was trying to form me to be an herbalist, but she was an herbalist in the old-fashioned sense of the word. She just worked with plants and she used plants for healing because that's what she knew and what she could afford. And so that was when we were growing up. We grew up close to both sets of our grandparents, and that was very fortunate for us. But my grandmother's way of being in the world impacted me very strongly as a child. So yeah, I think it was just a calling, and I was allowed to say yes, kind of follow that path.
I love that. And it seems like it's almost generational, something ancestral that calls to I feel like a lot of us have grandmother stories.
Yeah, grandmothers or grandfathers for certain. It is generational. Herbalism is passed down to the green blood of our ancestors for certain. And it's, part of the tradition of every culture in the world. We all have this connection with the plants.
Agreed. And it's been a fortunate change in societal norms these days. I feel like a lot more people are coming home to that feeling, that calling, that the green blood that lives in us, right? That's lovely. I love that. Okay. How do you feel your personal connection to plants and nature has evolved over the years?
Well, I think it's like any kind of relationship that you have with anything or anybody. The more time you spend, the more time intimate time when you're really together, listening deeply to one another, then that relationship deepens. And so, through my lifetime, because of this kind of evolving, revolving relationship I've had with plants that have taken me on so many different kinds of journeys, both as a teacher, as an educator, as a healer, as a businesswoman, as all of these different ways of relating, gardening, a forager, a lover of nature, all of these different ways of relating to the plants have definitely deepened my relationship. But when it when I feel the most connected is just when I'm doing nothing with the plants other than just being with them. So it is fun to make medicine with them, and it's fun. I had a lot of fun making products. I loved hosting large events, all of which were evolving and revolving around plants and, in all the many ways that they have impact and effective. But it's really when I'm just quietly by them, with them by myself, that I feel the closest and the deepest with them. So yeah, it's just been an ongoing deepening relationship. And it's a kind of relationship. I would say this is true of all good relationships. It's never boring, never tiring. You never know everything about.
It's never ending.
Yeah, it's a never ending discovery. And, in part because plants are very complex. There's so many different kinds. They impact us in so many different ways. But also just in part because it's the nature of relationship with anything, as we dive into it and are nurtured by it and are nurturing it, it just grows and deepens, becomes more interesting.
That is so true. I just recently started reading Cascade Geller's the book her husband put together. You actually wrote the foreword in that book.
Oh yeah.
And they quoted her saying, that she never wrote a book in her lifetime because the moment that she wrote something down, it changed. I feel so deeply connected to that statement, especially with herbalism. Like you said, it's very much a ongoing relationship. And the second you think you know somebody or know an herb or know a plant, it changes. There's something new to learn, something science changes. There's a new application for it. There's just ongoing learning forever. It's really just like a lifetime of relationships and knowledge. And it's beautiful that even this far down the line, you are still communing. I love that. What wisdom have you gained from working with herbs that's impacted your life just beyond healing?
Well, I think that my relationship with the plants have impacted every aspect of my life. Like they taught me a lot about being in a relationship, like just watching how plants thrive and grow together, how some plants grow stronger and bigger and how they overshadow other plants, how there's a succession of plants always happening, how plants manifest their beauty. There's no such thing as an ugly flower. And, it just gave me a way of viewing the world around me and looking, and that plants, like humans, thrive best in community, in diverse communities. So all plants are healthier. Yes, they need to have more than one of their own close by, but all plants thrive better, just like humans do, in diverse communities. Everything lives better when there's diversity. Yeah, and just even about the giveaway, plants have, it's not like they're, you know, looking to die, but when it's time, they seed, they go back to the earth, they become something valuable again, soil, earth, seed, growth. So that even the great giveaway that we have of just knowing how to die better, I learned by just watching the plants, the seasons of change. And also that's another thing, of really trusting the cycles that we're in. Like, I get anxious like everybody watching cycles and changes happening, that especially changes I don't like. But then I just think about plants and nature and how nature has just lived through millions of years of changes, and definitely things more volcanic than what we're going through now. And yeah, and so it just gives me this great trust that there's something far bigger than we know. It's like religion does for people, and I would say that plants are part of the spiritual path that I follow. Yeah, they
So
teach me everything.
honestly, it's so interesting just to see the symbiosis of it all. But everyone eventually, I mean, we all go through the same life cycle. Like you said, dying more gracefully. I think that our consciousness is almost a hindrance in that case, right? We overthink the inevitable
Well, I
and
think
not
it's
the
more
blessing behind
teaching.
it.
I think it's more the structure of teaching that we receive. That is one other thing I wanted to mention too, Justine, is one of the biggest things that I think I've learned from plants, but also from people. People have been huge teachers. I learned so much from interacting and observing people, of course. But one is that, all plants are thriving for themselves, right? In order to live their glorious short or long lives, they have to take in nourishment. They're hoping that there's going to be rain and water. There's this enormous amount of trust from a plant because they can't move around. Most plants, some can, to get what they need. So there's this enormous trust that they land where they're supposed to be, and then they grow beautifully. So, but all plants are living for more than just themselves. There's like a service. They're here for growing and thriving, but then there's a service component of that. So they're also here to give service to other, like, so all the plants that we use in our healing work, it's because they have chemical constituents that are helpful to us, right? Or all the plants that we're eating, that we grow or we forage to eat, they're growing for themselves, yes, but they also give themselves to other life that it might live. And to me, that's one of the biggest teachings that the plants offer me, is that, we thrive best when we find our service. And I think that's one of the major things that's missing. And especially we see it in young people, the younger generation is not knowing what their service is. There's something more than just them thriving to thrive. We thrive so that we can do the good work we've come to do. And you see that always in plants. Yeah.
Do you think that a lot of that disconnect between self and service, or finding what your service is to do with just societal norms today, like disconnect from earth, disconnect from community?
I think that plays a huge part in it for certain. Yeah, I think it does. I think it has more to do with the devices that everybody has. This device that we're using, it's a disconnect. People aren't in their communities out walking, meeting each other, riding bikes and stuff. You don't see kids doing that anymore, tumbling over the sidewalk, somebody coming and helping them. There's just most of it has to do because even when you're any place in public, even people sitting down and having dinner together are on their devices, right? It's crazy. And that's, in one way, it connects us all, but it connects us by disconnecting us.
Do you think that there is room for a relationship between both?
I mean, there is, yeah, but we have to cultivate that.
It's a fine line to ride. It really is. A lot of what I am attempting to do in my practice is trying to bridge the gap, per se, between the traditional ways of how things have been done for thousands of years and how things are now. But it's definitely a difficult give and take. Your practice and your lifelong observance of plants, do you feel like, did you have any mentors, traditions, ancestors, anything that has shaped your journey as an herbalist?
Well, we all have. I mean, we don't get where we are ever without having mentors and teachers and people who help us along the way. Definitely in the field of herbalism, really everything that we know today, just about everything. I'm going to qualify that. There are always new discoveries and new things that each generation adds to the body, to the traditional body that has been passed down. But, it's traditional knowledge. It's been passed down through the ancestors. So through thousands of years and around the world. That's what's so amazing about this field. So I definitely I've had so many mentors. Most of them were elders, but I've also had mentors that are my own age who just really impacted my life. Cascade is one for sure. You mentioned her. And I have living mentors, my good friend Jane Bothwell. And, just I learned so much from my friends who are herbalists and who follow the same path. But definitely I would say my grandmother, Mary Abelian Igikhanov, was one of my greatest mentors. She was just an amazing woman. She was a survivor of the Armenian genocide. Almost everybody in her family was killed. She had to flee her country, but she was always hopeful. She always carried love and a deep spirituality and religious belief in her heart. She used to tell us when we were children growing up, it was her belief in God and her knowledge of the plants that saved her life. And she meant it literally, right? So I think that was partly why she felt it was sort of her mission to pass both on a deep belief in a spiritual path or a religion, and also a knowledge of the natural world that helped her survive. But then also, when I was very young, I had the great opportunity to connect with a amazing character, Juliet de Berkeley-Levy, who was actually in the 1940s and 1950s was one of the most renowned herbalists in the world. She was writing herb books when hardly anybody was writing them, books focused on animal health. She really loved animals far more than she loved people. And when people, like in the 1960s, when there weren't a lot of herb books out, people were begging her to write herb books, right? And she said, for people, right? And she said, you can just use the animal books. But then she was really quite the character. But then eventually she did write some really good books. She wrote Nature's Children, which still is one of my favorite books for just understanding, how to connect children with nature. She wrote the complete herbal handbook for the complete handbook for farm and stable, the complete herbal handbook for the dog. I mean, her writings were incredible. And one of the things that I feel is very memorable in my herbal work that I'm most proud about is in the early 90s, I brought Juliet to America. And she hadn't been here since the 1950s, right? And yet there were thousands of people who had studied, read her books and knew of her work. And, so she had the opportunity for the first time in her life to see the impactful way that her way of life and her work impacted generations of herbalists. We're still being impacted. Like the elders that you study with, somewhere or another were influenced by her work.
That's so incredible.
Yeah. And then just a few others. Like I had the really good fortune to work with some incredible native elders who, were so willing to want to teach people, any of the young people who wanted to study with them. They were so wanting to pass the information on because, back in the 1960s and 1970s, the tribal people in our country were still so, ignored and repressed. And they'd only been allowed, it wasn't until the 1970s they were even allowed to practice their, spiritual traditions anymore. And so, to have young people coming and inviting them to come to events and gatherings where they were totally honored, really was a gift to them. And so some of those elders, there was Wallace Black Elk and Sun Bear, who has a varying reputation, but I really honor him for all the teachings that he passed on. And a woman named Oceana Fastwolf, she was also a very incredible teacher at that time. Yeah, there was just Bear Heart was another. There was just, in Rolling Thunder also, he used to come to our early herb conferences, and just be willing to share. He was always hesitant, but he wanted the information to be held and honored. So I'm really thankful for the elders who were willing to sit down with us newbies and pass on their teachers to us. I could go on and on because I
So
love the elders so much. I'm so grateful for them. Perhaps it's important to realize that, in the early days when I was first studying herbs, it wasn't like there were any herb schools or herbalists or herb courses, so
yep.
you were looking for the elders who were, still held their traditions and were wanting to pass them on. We were very gifted.
No kidding. I mean, I can only imagine. Unfortunately, those communities are so marginalized, and a lot of their traditions have been lost or died out. Their languages alone have all but died out in so many different ways. So, what an honor to be able to at least have those conversations and pass down from some way, some aspect to keep that knowledge alive.
Well, and we're seeing a revitalization. The young indigenous people are really working to reclaim their food, their herbalism, their languages. And I think I really want to honor Robin Wall Kimmerer for her incredible work with, bringing the teachings to a much wider audience. I think her books have had some of the greatest influence on modern way of thinking, right? Like every herbalist I know is reading Braiding Sweetgrass,
I love
her
Brittany
newest
Sweet.
book. Yeah, I mean,
I
she's
love how she writes. She's wow.
yeah.
It really just pulls it out of the page and makes it real how she's able to connect, her internal knowings back to an audience, especially an audience that may or may not even be a part of the indigenous community. I feel like bridging that gap to be able to make it make sense for somebody outside of themselves as well is like incredible, but agreed, she's amazing.
She's one of the Rainbow Bridge Walkers. Her latest book, I would say that I did want to mention this. There's an incredible movie about Juliet of de Berkeley Levy called Juliet of the Herbs. That's a full-length movie that everybody who's listening and anybody interested in plant lore or animal health should watch. You can get it on Netflix. I'm fairly sure that it's available. You can go online and order it. And then also, I want to mention that everybody who's interested in herbs should also read Robin Wall Kimmerer's, both of her books. Well, she's written several books. There was one about moss. I forgot the name of it. That was the first book I was introduced to that I loved. But definitely Braiding Sweetgrass and then her latest book, Serviceberry, are they're essential reading for plant lovers, for anybody who loves this earth and wants to see it continue. Yeah.
I'm trying to find the name of the Moss book because now I'm interested. I've read two of her books, and Braiding Sweet. Oh, Gathering Moss.
Gathering Moss. Yes, thank you.
Gathering Moss.
That was her one of her early books, and it's just beautiful. Yes.
Oh my gosh, agreed. Anybody listening knows she's an amazing author, and everything that she has to say and the work that she does within the community is so vital and so necessary. But also want to add, I know we were talking about social media earlier and well, devices. And the generation essentially of being online. And I think that one caveat to, the disconnect on positive is it's definitely brought herbalism and reconnection through community in a different light. There are so many herbalists on TikTok now, for better or for worse. But the fact that it's just sparking this knowledge and getting people to come through the doors of places like Sweha and like, different natural healing arts schools around the country is fantastic, and really just like giving an opportunity for the knowledge to be shared. I think that that's probably my only positive right now about that.
Well, there are a lot of positives always, or we wouldn't be doing it. We wouldn't have this podcast. There's definitely a lot, but such a powerful tool, and people haven't really learned how to use it well. Listen, this is so archaic to say this, but it was the very same with TV. When TV was first introduced, I was a child when TVs were first introduced, and they had this incredibly opportunity to be something so positive, spread education and, spread awareness and knowledge. And they just turned into like, advertisements and junk and horrible things. And, they made families sit around a TV rather than being outside working together. So it was a tool that was just abused and misused. And that's what we have. We have this amazing tool that humans we don't seem to be able to know how to manage well. And yeah, so yes, it has tremendous possibilities. There's no doubt about it, and some really good things. But if we don't learn how to manage it well, it will take us over and destroy us, which is kind of what seems to be happening in some ways.
Indeed. It
Anyway,
is a difficult one. Okay. So if you had to pick a single herb that was the most transformative in your life, what would it be and why?
well, that's a really hard one. It's like, asking somebody to pick their favorite child. Sophie's choice here. Well, let's see. So the plant that's been most influential is not necessarily the one that I use the most, or maybe even love the most. But I wouldn't definitely say not the one I love the most, because I have a lot of favorite plants. But I would say self-heal, Prunella vulgaris, the little mint that grows in everybody's garden. If you have a garden, you're going to have Prunella growing up. Because Prunella was the very first plant, self-heal was the very first plant that taught me about what we call plant spirit medicine. It taught me about soul medicine. And it was the first plant that I allied with without even knowing what a plant ally was. This is like back in the late 1960s and the early 1970s. So yeah, Prunella, it just, I was in dire need of counsel. I was just feeling so torn by an issue going on, in the community that I lived in. And I was feeling torn and I didn't know what to do. And I found myself crying in a field of what I thought was, grass or whatever. And I look and there's prunella all around me, self-heal,
Gosh,
all around me when I'm looking. And I start looking at it and yeah, it's like it
messages
never
everywhere.
back together, right? It just brought me back into a place of power and strength so I could know what I was feeling. That was the first time. And then the second time was a few years later. I was doing an herb walk on a dirt road, on a backcountry road. And I was all finished with the walk. And there was about 30 people on that walk. We were walking back, just talking about plants and stuff. And all of a sudden I got this big message to lean down. There was a little prunella and I crouched over like that and was leaning in the ditch. And at that moment, a motorcycle, Harley Davidson no less, was speeding down that road with a young kid who didn't have his license or anything. He was just out for a wild ride. He came around the corner and he slid out of control. And if I hadn't been leaned over, kind of protecting my torso, I would have been hit right in my chest.
Good.
But he slid in and he hit me on my legs because of prunella. Prunella called me down to protect my body. And so I ended up injured pretty badly and in the hospital for a long time, but I got all knit together again. So yeah, prunella has been one of my plant allies. Prunella, was the plant who taught me about plant spirit communication and plant allies.
Oh my gosh. What a way to hear a loud and clear message, right?
Well, plants talk like that, like people always say it's, or Stephen Berger used to talk about the lost language of plants. And I always say it's not a lost language at all. It's just forgotten. But once we start listening, you know, and they don't speak in one language. Plants have many ways that they speak to us, like very seldom in English or, some Spanish or Italian. It's mostly by a sensory experience that we actually begin to hear and understand the plants.
And honestly, I think it's just a matter of us being able to slow down enough to hear.
Yeah,
How often do we stop and literally smell the roses anymore, right? Everyone is go, go, go. Makes it a tad bit difficult to hear messages that are waiting for you if your ears are closed.
you hurry by too fast, right? Yeah.
Man, well, that is an what a story to have, and no wonder that would be your connection plant. For me, it was Daga. Daga was the first plant I ever heard. We were in the garden at Sonoran University in Tempe. I don't know if you've ever been, but they have a glorious little medicinal garden out back that all the SWEHA students get to work in while you're going to school. And we were tasked with finding something to go sit with. Daga was bright and bold and standing tall. And I don't know, it was the first conversation that I was ever, since childhood at least, ever able to really just like hear.
That's
Uh,
beautiful.
so interesting how that happens. I think that everybody, but especially those of us who are blessed enough to work with plants, we're born with this ability to hear and to sit with and commune with plants, even if we're too young to realize we're really doing it. And as we get older and life influences us more, we unfortunately can lose the connection a little bit. But the beautiful side is that it's just always there waiting if you give it time to go through and smell those roses, right?
So true. That's beautiful.
Okay, so in your opinion, speaking uh of different aspects of herbalism, what do you think is the most misunderstood aspect of herbalism today, and what do you do to work on bridging that gap?
Well, I think there's two issues that maybe come up for me. One is just understanding our role as stewards of healing plants. People come into this big field and it's so exciting and there's so much you could do with them. But I really feel that the real reason that we see herbalism growing is that the gardens are in danger and in dire danger, right? And when you love something, you'll stand up and protect it when you know it. And so, when you go online and you see all these herbalists and all these herb stores and all these herbal products, you have to ask where all the plants coming from, and still so many of them are coming from wild sources. And truly, we don't have enough wild sources to supply the enormous demand, the worldwide demand. So, my thought about it is that, we're called into plants because of our own needs, like we need healing. We want to feel healthier. We want to be whatever. We want to be cool, or we're cool now, right? And for whatever reason it is, one more thing to learn, because the more we learn, the smarter we are. But the real reason is that we need to be grounded in the fact that the plants, the gardens need us. As much as we need them right now, they need us. And so I think our primary job as plant lovers is to be stewards, really, conservationists, to really, when you buy a product, where is it coming from? And you don't go to the company to ask, you have to know, is it being cultivated, and if so, organically, and who's harvesting it, and are they being paid fairly? A really excellent book that I would recommend was called The Business of Botanicals. It's called Following the Herbal Harvest. Right now, the name changed, Following the Herbal Harvest by Anne Armbredt. And it was just published a couple years ago. It's a brilliant, brilliant book. So it's as important for people who are just coming into the field, people who are thinking about starting businesses, who are making products, who are using plants, to really understand the nature of where these plants are coming from. And obviously, the smartest thing to do is grow your own. But most of us who are working with lots of plants are purchasing and buying and, selling and making products and stuff. So that's a huge responsibility. And I think the other issue that surfaces for me, and it's probably the one that more people are aware of now, is the whole cultural appropriation thing, like of being equally as conscious of who we're getting our plants from and what cultures they come from and how to honor those cultures. I like to say, like, we need to have cultural appreciation, not appropriation. I do think there's a lot of misunderstandings around these issues. And when people who are not really aware of the profound impact of either appreciation or appropriation, they can get them really confused. Like a lot of the conversations that happen around them, I just think to myself, oh my God, wrong track. Because herbalists throughout time and cultures throughout time have shared with one another. That's how we built our body of information, right? Like when you look at American herbalism, it's based on, in most herbal cultures in the world, if you look back far enough, look back a few hundred years or a few thousand years, it evolved around people sharing information and trading, right? So, there is always that. In healing work, especially, like healers don't see somebody over there who's sick and dying, or their children sick and dying, and go, well, they're not of my culture, so I'm going to leave them there. That's just like doctors, doctors without borders and herbalists without borders and all healers without borders, will always help and share information and share what works. And so the idea of sharing and appreciation is a really important part of how we pass information. But also, we have to be very mindful that we're not owning the information. I would say a really safe bet is not to own any of it. It all comes through us as a gift. Like my formula is, I like to claim them, oh, I did this, I made that. But ultimately, I absolutely know that I just happen to be standing in the right place. The information flowed into me, and I have the gift to be able to love that information, and then it's my responsibility to pass it on. I think that's the place that we all need to come to.
Honestly, there's been a lot of talk about close practices in recent years in regards to like cultural herbalism. So I think that your view on, it belongs to all and none of us, essentially, is probably one of the more fluid views that I've seen on the subject as of recently.
I might say, it's always good to ask the ancestors, ask the elders. And as I was sharing earlier, like elders from every culture, like my grandmother, she would share readily with a Turkish person. Really, she never taught us anything about hating cultures. It was all about, governments and things. I'm mentioning that because of the Armenian genocide, right? But there was never a blaming. She used to tell us that it was many Turkish people that helped them. And the Turkish culture and the Armenian culture are very intermingled. So the herbal information is shared, right? And so the idea of a closed practice, it's like, what? And I would say the same thing with almost all of those elder indigenous cultures, including Juliet. She was Turkish and Egyptian culture, right? So, and she traveled around the world. She came to the US to study actually with Rolling Thunder back in the 90s. And then she went down to Baja to study with the Mexican healers and with her Hungarian teacher, Edward Zazikli. And all of that was blended together in what she offered the world. And that's how it is. The things that I teach are compilations of my own ancestry, which is Armenian, Italian, Irish, plus wherever they picked up, through the centuries. So I don't even know how people can talk about, I'm not sure what you mean by a closed practice. I haven't heard it. But the term sounds like, how can you even talk about a closed practice? Herbs have traveled around. That's another thing. Like, even when we talk about indigenous plants, you have to just talk about how far do you want to go back? Because where I live in New England, I look out and we're in this very lush, it's a eastern hardwood forest, northern forest. Every single plant here is only 10,000 years old because 10,000 years ago there sat a glacier that was 2 miles high, right? So the whole entire landscape was different with different plants. So it just kind of depends on your worldview. But if we're just looking at recent times as herbalists, that doesn't give us perspective at all. At least that's my humble thoughts about it and what my ancestors, and here I'm just talking about the voices that come into me, what they share with me.
Okay. So with that being said, how do you balance traditional, like honoring traditional herbal practices while still embracing modern knowledge and innovation?
Well, quite obviously, when you listen to me teach and talk and read my books, I'm much more of a traditional herbalist, but I do love science. And I love the studies and I love the research and I love knowing what the chemical constituents are in plants. And I love my more intellectually left brain herbalists. Like, I love going to their classes because I find it so stimulating. I don't always understand it all. So I think that that just gives us another window. But when it comes down to like when there's differences between empirical evidence and science, I'll almost always stand on the side of empirical evidence that, or go to the plants directly. Like when I'm confused about like what is really going on here with this plant, I'll either go directly to the plant or I'll listen to what traditional knowledge has said, because the difference is traditional and empirical knowledge is based on thousands of years of experience, cultures around the world, distilling what they learn off of actual human beings, not in laboratory situations in vitro, and almost always, not always, but a great deal of the time in inhumane studies on animals, which I don't think herbalists should even quote, actually. I think you cannot talk about healing while you're abusing a whole nother life form. It's a horrendous practice that humans fell into, and it's a big mark against our human evolvement, our soul growth as a species.
Oh, I agree. You talk about referencing plants, going directly to the plants pretty frequently in your work. How big of a role does intuition play in your practice?
Well, I think it must, again, just because of the kind of person I am and my early training and, the direction I went in, I do value a lot on what I feel, my intuition, what comes into me, but I don't trust it entirely. And I always tell people that we want to train people in being able to communicate because it's just such holy work. And it just is so incredible when you begin to just go to nature and can understand what nature's telling you. Right? But because it's where we are in our human evolution, we have not been trained in intuition. And even people who are very intuitive, you kind of have to rely also on your brain. So I like to combine the both. Like if I get an intuitive, like I get a feeling I'm listening to somebody and I get a sense of what might be going on for them, then I'm going to follow that up with asking a lot of really physical questions like,
Right.
so what are the symptoms and how long have you had it and when did it start? And then I'm going to do my research. I'm going to read in books, etc., or go to my notes or ask other herbalists who might have better answers than me. So I use my intuition a lot, but I try to back it up with my brain power when can. But again, if it comes down to intuitive knowledge or my brain thinking for me, I usually will try to follow my intuition. I just lean on that a little more.
I think it's rather surprising how often the science follows the intuition. There's been multiple times where I've been just called to a specific herb for a client and was not on my radar, had no idea why this specific herb, and then you do your research and you find your, whatever action and in compliance with whatever they have going on. And 9 times out of 10, it surprises me just how accurate the calling is to whatever the ailment is.
Well, I think that's because if a person uses practices of their intuition, their intuitive abilities, then you become stronger and stronger with that. Also, you have to balance that with study. You have to research. Like your intuition is not going to lead you to a plant unless you've heard about it or researched it or know about it. It's not like just out of the blue. Sometimes that happens, but most often it's because you have this body of information about plants. And so when your intuition is sorting through, or it's like something's going on in somebody's body, oftentimes that happens because you've done a little research about, you sort of know how the body is functioning.
Sure.
So you're combining those two. So yes, it does happen occasionally. You know nothing about anything and something pops into your intuitive mind and intuitive limbic brain, right, and lead you in the right direction. But normally it's like the more we know about things, both intuitively and studying scientifically, research, the mind part of it, those two things are very often, like you said, very, very connected. They link together really well. So yeah.
So, for somebody who is brand new to our world, brand new on their journey to herbalism, what advice would you give them?
Oh, for somebody who's new, well, to spend as much time with your plant teachers as you do with human teachers or more. So it's great. There are just wonderful teachers and books to read and, all kinds of things to engage the mind. But don't forget to learn from the plants, like that would be the best, make sure. And for all the teachers, are teaching, make sure that there's as much opportunity for your students to be engaged with the plants as they are sitting in front of the screen reading or in front of a book reading, like, so we learn a lot through our human teachers and a lot through what they've written. So much information available, like you were saying earlier, Justine, but we learn always more about anything when we go to the source. Go to the source.
As
Yeah.
a new herbalist, I promise you all that you will have a library within a year. And hopefully a garden within a shorter time period than that. But no, I agree. I think that being outside and feet to ground and hands in dirt is at least my method of communication when it comes to plants, where I feel the most connected. And I agree. Being able to spend time with the plant teachers has definitely been a almost as big of an influence as like the books and the elders that I've learned from, which is pretty fantastic. You have done so many things, Rosemary. You have wrote so many books and conferences, plant conservation, all of the things. What legacy do you hope to leave behind? And how do you see your work contributing to the future of herbalism?
Those are very sweet questions. Well, I think the things that I'm most pleased with that I've done is the work with plant conservation and United Plant Savers. That was just a brilliant moment in time when a group of herbalists, we came together to really address the need of plants, right? We were seeing our classes filling up, we were seeing herb stores popping up, we were seeing, people were interested in what we were talking about. They were actually coming to hear us. We were getting book contracts. All that took about 30 years to just get to that place where herbalism was, making an inroad into our society again after being really driven deeply underground, where I always say plants thrive quite well. So, to really recognize that the plant resources were a major concern for us and to really address that problem, and then to put our hearts and souls and most of our hours and time into creating an organization that addressed that. So I'm really proud of United Plant Savers. And I just have to say, really, quite anybody who works with medicinal plants specifically should be a member, because it's an organization. It's an organization that's really, sole concern is the health and longevity, long ability for these plants to thrive in the North American continent. So yeah, and then as I said, I was really proud of myself for recognizing the elders as our teacher and really spotlighting them in the work, like, so we would just find elders wherever we could and bring them into the events and conferences and make places for them, make honored places for them in the circle. I think that was through, a close association with my grandparents and watching the way my mother was with her mother, just such an honoring in those old traditions. So yeah, I think those two things actually are the things that I'm pleased with that I did. But, I just did what I was called to do. And it seems like a lot, but I've been doing this. I'm in my late 70s now, and I've been doing this for, it says over 50 years. Honestly, it's been almost 60 years. I started when I was 21 years old. I opened my first herb store. So it's just, I was active and loved what I did and I was busy, but I didn't really do all that much really. Art.
My goodness, but that's amazing. 21. I didn't even know what I was doing with my life at 20. How glorious that you've got the opportunity to spend so much time doing exactly what you're supposed to be doing. I think that that is the biggest blessing, and something like what we were talking about earlier. A lot of people struggle with their why and, coming to what they're supposed to be doing in this world. So that is amazing.
Thank you. Well, we all are given gifts at birth, and everybody has something special that they've come in with, and everyone has a big challenge. Hopefully, because we learn the most from our challenges. So my direction and my service in life was always very clear, but believe me, I've had as many challenges and I'm grateful for them, hard challenges. But I've learned really, I always think of that beautiful quote by Mary Oliver that, one day someone I love gave me a box of darkness. It took me years before I realized it too was a gift. And I think that's a lot. We have to look at those big challenges, those big dark boxes, as, how they are really, how we can fill them with light and lift them up. And so it's a process and a part of life we're all doing together.
Good. That's amazing. Speaking of UPS, of United Plant Savers, are you going to be at the symposium this year?
That I wouldn't miss it for anything in the world. They're moving it to it's been moved from where it's been held every year for the last 30 years at Wheaton College in the Northeast to Cleveland, Ohio, near the Lloyd Library and also near the United Plant Savers beautiful sanctuary that's out in Rutland. So yeah, Susan Leopold, who's organizing it, has wanted to move it because she wants to focus it on the eclectics. So the eclectic herbalists who had such a profound influence on the American medical system and herbalism.
I love it. I will be there. So
Yeah,
hopefully we
me
get a
too.
chance to chat. I know a bunch of us girls are gonna make our way to Ohio from the herb class this year, so we will be there.
Awesome. Great.
Books wise, what do you have going on? Is there anything that you want to shout out? Anything upcoming for you?
Yeah, well, I'm always offering my home study course, The Science and Art of Herbalism. It's one of the ways that I still keep engaged with my students and teach, and I offered a live class component to that, which has really been fun. So and I have a brand new book that's coming out, which is probably the book I'm the most excited about, called The Generosity of Plants. Of all the books, this one has been the most fun because it's not a how-to book. You know, all of my books are very like, take care of your family, take care of your honey, take care of your wife, take care of the kids. You know, it's just how to make herbs. But this book is actually a book of inspiration from plant lovers around the world, quotes and reflections and musings that I've collected over the last 50 years, right? Big files of these quotes. And I just thought it'd be so beautiful to arrange them so that they're like meditations for us. You just open them up and there's something beautiful that an herbalist or a healer or a plant lover has reflected on. So it's very beautiful. It's a gathering of plant wisdom from plant lovers of the world called The Generosity of Plants.
Excited. When does it release?
In April.
That is so soon. That's
Yeah, I'm really excited about it. Honestly, I wished I had it. Oh, I do have it here. I have it right here. I didn't think I did, but it's a beautiful little gift size. And then you just open up the pages and every page is lushly beautiful.
Oh my goodness, whoever did the photography for that book is a
Yeah, they did all the artwork. All of it's original for the book.
it's gorgeous. That's gorgeous. Oh yeah.
These were pressed flowers that they did, and then they took pictures. I know it was a work of love from my publishers too. You know, they really wanted to make look at they did all these plant pressings for it.
My gosh, Rosemary, I'm gonna have to open up a second shelf in my bookshelf for all of your books that I own. Now, here we go with another one.
This is my last. Well, I've been wanting to work on my herbal novel for the last 40 years. It's called Chili Verde and the Garlic Queens, a story of love, herbs, and friendship, or love, friendship, and herbs.
No,
But I don't know that I'll really write it. It's been going on in my head forever. But yeah,
at least should. If it's in your
so
head, it's got to be out on paper.
I don't know. I'm a little too old to write a hot book on herbalism.
So what's next for you then? This book
Um,
publishes and
let's see, what am I doing? Oh, I've been planning a family trip to Armenia in June. So I'm taking my family members back to Armenia.
that's
So I'm really, really excited about that. And I also get to do a trip to Sweden. A group of Swedish herbalists have organized a wonderful retreat there outside of Stockholm. So I'm going to go to Sweden in April, actually, in Armenia in June.
so excited to try new.
Really, you know, I when I travel and I do love learning the plants, but I don't really learn them necessarily to bring home to my own medica, even when they're fantastic plants. It's more for me just looking at how people have used plants in different cultures and the overlaps and the differences, like even with the same plant, like how one culture might use plantain versus how we use them, and the ways that it's not that there aren't things that I learn every time I travel, but I don't go necessarily to learn how other cultures are using their plants so much as this overview of seeing how cultures use them and how they've integrated it into their cultures. And you know, meeting other herbalists and other healers have been just tremendous inspiration for me in my own life as I've traveled around the world and seeing gardens in other cultures, and just it's like so exciting for certain. The guide who I've been working with in Armenia, is connecting us to some of the old healers there the old herbalist. So I'm so excited about that.
Oh my gosh, that's like trip of a lifetime.
Yeah.
Talking about going back to your roots,
Yeah.
get to go rediscover some things that, gosh, I'm very, very excited for you.
Thank you. Just,
Fun. I can't wait till I can just travel and look at herbs everywhere. It's gonna be wonderful.
yeah.
One day. Okay, I have absolutely, absolutely loved talking to you. Thank you so much for doing this.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks for listening. Make sure you check out mysticbotanicaherbs.com for the written editorial of this episode, plus a bunch of other awesome stuff.